So we continue from yesterday, and I found that bug. So the reason why this is not recalculating here is a very, very strange reason. It took a long time to figure out. It's because even though I have two markers here, I actually have four. I'm accessing some values in the array that are not these two markers from here. And the main reason is that I'm calling the initialization function twice. This main function here, it calls init map. I remove it entirely from there. And the script that includes the Google Maps API has a callback function init map. So both of them were called, the markers were created, and then two other markers were recreated and added on top of them. It's a bit complicated to explain why that issue was oh, sorry, this has to be here now because I removed the callback from here. So I didn't keep it here because I wanted the map to load, and after the map loads, the initialization function starts. So if I refresh the page now, it works. So it does now this routing. Here, every time I'm moving the markers, and if I open this network tab here, I can see that every time I release the marker, it calls the server, the OSRM server installed on CS server, and gives me the directions. So this works just fine. But I would like to have somehow in the future the option to move this path a little more. So now I have a path from A to B. Let's say I am at A, like I am at Science Park, and I want to go towards Noliakka somewhere. But I think that this path, I mean, this is going to be the only path that I can work with unless I could drag this route somehow. So the reason I want to be able to do that is because if this will be very windy choice, I want to see what are my options to get there some other way. So I would like to create now C marker, D marker, and so on. And what I want to do is create these markers if I click on the map. So just clicking on the map somewhere is going to add another marker. Maybe deleting markers by clicking on the markers themselves should be an option. And if that happens, I need to define a way to relabel them so that they still start at A, B, C, D, and so on. If I'm gonna have A, B, C and I remove B, C should become B, more or less. So these are the kind of things that I want to work on now, and I didn't realize yesterday that I will need such a thing. So this is what usually happens in development. This waterfall model doesn't really apply anymore. So as you're developing, you figure out you need some new things, and then you have to update the code to cope with it. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we have here markers, push, add marker, center, and Noliakka. So this add marker function that we have here needs to be called also when we click on the map somewhere. I'm also going to search now for some already made solutions, so I don't have to write too much. So add marker on Google Map click gives me something here. It's very easy, it's not complicated, but I just prefer to search these instead of reading, reading documentation. So now when the map is created, I need to add to it an event listener. So this is a click event listener, which calls now this place marker function at the given location. But I already have my add marker function that works with the given location here. So I actually don't need this. So I copied too much. I can call my function, and this one also expects a label. For now, I'm going to put a label. Let's put it Z, and that's it. So I'm going to refresh now the page here and click somewhere on the map, and the new marker appears there. And because I'm calling my add marker function, it also has the dragging event listener there, which is quite good, I think. Now, it doesn't go to the markers array, so I could put that here now. Or instead of doing this, I could actually modify the markers array inside the add marker function. I think this would make a little bit more sense, so that we don't forget to do that later. So here, instead of returning the marker, I'm going to say markers push marker. Okay. And now I need to handle this label issue. So all of them are going to become Z, but I want them to be labeled from A, B, C, D, and so on. So for that, immediately after we add a new marker, I'm going to call a function update marker labels, a new function that I need to define now. And this one is going to go through all of them. And update the labels. So how I'm going to do that, first I'm going to get the label. I think it was like that. And then if you look here in my add marker function, the label has different properties like the text, the color, the font size. Now when I get the label, I already inherit these properties. So I only have to modify the text value is equal to
A plus Y?
A plus I could consider. I don't know how char works in
Yeah,
Java.
I don't know that either. If they're ASCII characters, that it would work.
Yeah, but if I put this, I think it will just concatenate. So it will make A0, A1, A2, A3. Let's try it, but I believe that's what's going to happen. So after we do that, we need to set the label to this label that we have updated now. So I'm going to save now the file, refresh the page, and what you'll see is actually that we get A0 already there, even, and A1 there, and A2, A3, A4, because this add marker function overwrote these two labels that I gave there already. So these are overwritten now. They are more or less deprecated parameters. I could even remove them from here to make it backwards compatible. If you're worried about backwards compatibility, you could put here a default value, but now you can call the function also without that parameter. I'm not sure if JavaScript complains about this, but some languages would complain if you start calling it without the full parameter list. Okay, now about the ASCII characters, I really don't know how to do it, and I have very hard time finding keywords for how to search solutions for it, but I'm gonna do a dirty fix. I'm gonna define an array of letters, and this is gonna be A, B, C, D, E, F. And probably I'm not gonna test more than this, but you get the idea. So now in the label here, instead of doing that, I'm going to get the ith element from this letters array. And when I refresh the page, we get A, B, C, D, E, F, and at some point it stops working properly. We could also limit this. So the reason I'm not gonna overthink this letters part is because if you give too many waypoints, it's gonna become much more costly for computing directions later on. So in general, it's not a great idea to have as many waypoints as the user wants. But for now, it's a solution. It's probably not the best, but yeah. Okay, so this is something quite nice now, but the directions that are calculated here, so from A to B, are just that C is never considered, but A and B is always considered. So what I want now is to get directions from A to B, from B to C, from C to D, and so on, between all the pairs, to show me where am I going to go, which roads I'm going to take. So this get directions function, I'm gonna copy this, I'm gonna cut this code, and I'm gonna make a new function with it called get all directions. So what it's going to do is I am going to call it every time I drag a marker, but what it's going to do, it's going to go through all the markers except for the last one, and what we do here is we take the point A to be the marker at I, and point B to be the marker at I plus 1. So because we have now, we don't go until the last one is going to be considered on the second last item. And then we get the directions, okay? But the problem now is that it's more or less most likely going to get directions, it's going to show the directions just between the last two pairs of markers, because the get directions function is upon success just modifying one polyline, so one line on the map. I remind this is quite bad implementation from yesterday. It was assuming some other kind of interface. So I'm also going to store polylines between marker pairs here instead. So I will have polylines, an array, and this won't be even needed anymore. I will keep it as a local variable. So when I'm going now into the get directions, get all directions, here where I'm constructing the polyline path, this is now the local variable, and every time I'm done constructing it, instead of setting the path to that global variable there, we need to create a new polyline here. Oops. So I'm going to also move the global variable definition. I'm going to just cut it from here, from the main function. It was from way back when we made this Superman application. And here define the polyline, a new polyline with the path parameter coming from OSRM. So with this we add it to the polylines array, and now we can handle all the polylines whenever we want. We could remove them, for example, when needed. So hopefully this one works now. I'm going to test it. So I click, marker C is there, but I have never added this to clicking the marker. It was just when markers are dragged. So I'm gonna try dragging C. And now I have A to B and B to C. Apparently B to C is just coming back the same way for a while in this case. But when I'm moving it here, I see that the polylines just add up. They need to be cleared. So to clear them, these polylines, the simplest way to do it is to clear it here when we recalculate all the directions. And doing this is not really enough, because here what would happen is we lose the references. That's it. But they are still staying on the map. We need to remove all the lines from the map first. So that looks like this. I'm gonna copy here a for loop. So I'm going to go through all the polylines, and I'm going to say to each polyline to not be on the map anymore. Now they become empty references and probably will be removed from memory also when JavaScript decides this garbage collector.
Don't we also want to have the direction between C and A? So we have A to B, B to C, C to A?
I don't think so. So I will explain again the logic for this new application idea just in 1 second. This get all directions needs to happen also when creating a new marker, right? So when clicking on the map, so this was not happening before. So the idea, okay, error, polyline is not defined.
It was polylines.
Yes. Okay, so the idea here is more or less, I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going from A to B, and then I'm going to C. And my destination is always going to be the last marker then. If I don't like this path here, I can move B here and I get a different way of going to C. So this B becomes a waypoint. It's not really the best way of doing it, because, for example, okay, let's implement first deleting and then we can discuss about this implementation. So I want to also remove a marker whenever I click on it. So to remove the marker, I have to go into the add marker function, and instead of just having here the drag end event, I guess I can put here a listener for the click event and say on marker click. So when we have the onMarker click event, what I want to do essentially is remove the clicked marker. I think I can go through each of them, through each of the markers, and compare the latitude and longitude of the marker with the location that I clicked, more or less. So I'm going to say if this marker's position is equal to the location of the clicked marker, I'm going to say, first of all, markers I set map null, otherwise the same issue as before with the polylines would happen. But I'm also going to remove from the markers array at the ith position one element. So hopefully this works. I think it works. I tried yesterday. Yeah, okay. So something happened. Okay, it's good, but I still need to update after whatever happens. I have to update the directions, and I also have to update the labels. So these are two things that I need to do if I want to relabel the things. See here I have AC. This should now be AB for consistency. So finally, ABC, if I click on B, it's going to remove it from the path. Now I have a direct path from A to B. And yeah, this is now a little bit complicated. So the interface is not as good as I would have wanted. The main idea is that now if you go from A to B, you would like to maybe see if there is another path that is less windy by maybe moving this line down here. So the way you have to do it now is actually something like that. 2 clicks, 3 clicks to remove the first one. Or dragging this one here and then repositioning the destination there. So if you look at Google Maps, it's actually possible to drag the line from here to here. It more or less creates a new marker every time you move your mouse over the path. And then that marker is moved, and the same behavior is actually happening, with the addition that on mark drag, it recalculates. So if you go to Google Maps, this is the behavior I talk about. You can see the new marker over my mouse, and when I'm dragging, it actually recalculates even before I let go of the marker here. This is way too difficult to implement, even though it would be nicer interface. I'm not going to do it because I want to focus on more interesting things, but this app will have possibilities for improvement, definitely. Okay, so now the idea is where, if I want to define a path in some way, it is possible. One issue is that it seems to link itself, to merge itself to the highway here, and this is because I'm using the road, the car network instead of the walking network. And we said that this is aimed at pedestrians. So here, instead of specifying the car network, I'm gonna just replace with the walking instead. And well, I'm going to try to simulate these locations again, but most likely they will not end up on the highway anymore. And we can even see here, cases where this forest road is taken by the router now. Before it would have said to go on this road probably and there. Okay. So any questions about this part? Not perfect interface because it needs a little bit more clicking, but you can do whatever path you want to do by doing that. And I don't connect back to A because the user wants to go somewhere, to some destination. So, of course, you can do it if you want to make a loop for the user, like some kind of traveling salesman problem, then yes, connecting like that would be an option. Okay, if no questions here, I'm going to move on to the next step, and that's going to be how to find the forested areas. So we said yesterday that if you walk through the forest, most likely you are safe. So no matter how strong the wind is, how do we get these forested areas? And I mentioned this overpass API and this overpass turbo application. And actually it even remembers now the query from yesterday, so it uses cookies or something. So if I'm going to run this, it will show me what are the forested areas within a region, this bounding area of the screen more or less. So no other forests because that's when I ran the query. To see actually how the query that we need to form looks like, okay, the syntax depends very much on the server setup. I will try to explain just a second. If you click on export here and you go to query, you can see that there are some different ways of expressing the query. I believe our server is set up to, so Overpass is also installed on our server. This is one thing I forgot to mention. So I can use it unlimited number of requests and queries. And I believe we have this XML format expected there. If you click on this, you will get the way this query looks like in XML format. So I'm going to copy this here in a new tab and explain a little bit why it looks slightly different than before. One of the reasons are the bounding regions of the screen, south, west, north and east, are specified. We are also going to specify some of these regions. And well, it's XML, it's not this probably compact. Let's see if it's, yeah. So this is called the compact query. It looks like this, but this is a one-liner, and it has also the borders of the screen referenced here. On this interface, doing this trick means that you are talking about the borders of the screen, so it detects them automatically. But on the server, we will need to specify them in code. Okay, so how did I do this? This code from here, I copied it. I just did copy paste. And on the server in PHP, I pasted it here. So this is a PHP string definition. But instead of the south, west, north, and east hard-coded values that I had there, I have them as parameters to my getForest path. And the Overpass API is accessible in this by this script here. So it's installed under the development version of Mopsy, but it's, yeah. Anyway, so again here, because I installed the things on my own server, I don't have to worry about anything but server load. If too many people will use it, then it gets high, I mean, processor works too hard. So once the script is here, I'm not going to go too much about the server-side part, because usually when you call such an API, it does the magic for you. But I will still explain how this one works. It does a curl post to this link here, including the query from Overpass that Overpass expects it to do, and then reads the result in this data variable. This data comes in JSON because this API PHP was made to convert the XML into JSON, so I don't have to worry about it here. And using JSON is easier in PHP, and in JavaScript you have all of these native functions that can handle it. Now here you see something strange is happening. I mean, a lot of code, and I will explain what is happening. So if I'm going to go here to the data, you will see that each building is an element that looks, each forest is an element that looks like this. So it has tags, it says it's a forest, but these nodes actually tell you the polygon's shape. The problem is these are not coordinates. They are IDs that point to a large array of coordinates that is down here at the end. So all the forest polygons that you see here on the map, each of these points is identified by a unique ID, unique identifier. That identifier, for example, 253732 something something, can be part of more forests, especially here if you want to consider the closed polygon. So it could be part of more things, but okay, for some reason the search doesn't work well. But all of them, in this it doesn't work. All of them, their ID has a latitude and longitude value appended to it later in this second part of the response. Yeah, in the second part of the response. So those are called nodes, the things that have the IDs here. These are nodes, and each node has a latitude and a longitude connected to the ID. So that's what this code is doing. It's giving me it's parsing the data and giving it to me in a more pleasant format. This has some bad copy-paste from elsewhere. I was using it to retrieve shapes of buildings, and we will also use the same. So I will try to do now a request to this server that can give us the forested areas, and we will see how the response looks like. Okay. So this request, it supports both get and post parameters. The request type has to be this get forest, and I need to send it north, south, east, and west borders. Okay, fair enough. And the address for the server is going to be in the root and then PHP directory here. So let's call it somehow. I'm going to call it context server because we probably are going to use it for more than the forest. And well, let's just try it. I'm going to go back here and get some kind of boundaries. So I'm going to run this query like that. Export here just to copy these things, and I'm going to debug to see if I get the same result that this API is giving me. So in the init map function, I'm going to define some variables for south, for west, for north, and for east, and we need to do the request to this server path that we just defined. So it's gonna look like so I'm gonna do a asynchronous post request. I could give it also a get request. It's not that a long URL, but let's leave it like this for now, and I mean forever, and do it to the context server, and we need to send it some data, and then when the response is coming, so this is going to be the callback function. Okay, I'm going to just log the response for now to see how it looks like. And the data attribute is the same parameter, the same post parameter, HTTP parameter, plus another JSON string. And this param is going to be similar as last time, so it needs a request type. It was, what was it? So now you can even see here, get forest. And it needs all of these things from up here. So I'm actually going to copy these in this way. I need to also remember to replace the equals with the column, otherwise I get an error. Okay, so going a little slow, but I think it's going to work. I think this is it. Let's see what happens if I refresh the page now. So I refresh the page. I have some print here. So the response, it's not that big. Let's try to print it somewhere. There are many of these online JSON parsers, and I have an array with 11 objects here, and each object is actually another array. So these 11 should fit here, and each item in each array is going to be a latitude and a longitude. So what this means is 11 forested areas, and this forested area has 95 points on its polygon, so quite many points in its definition. This one has just 5 of them. So now what I want to have, instead of echoing it here, I want to draw polygons on the map with this response from here. So I'm going to say here forests, let's call it like that. And yeah, I think it was just like this. Okay, so these forests should be there, and let's prepare here draw forests. A function, it doesn't exist yet, but we are gonna write it. So what we do is for each polygon we need to draw it somehow. So I think because the data is already in the LAT-LNG format, this can be given as a path to a polyline or a polygon. So polygon object also exists in Google Maps. It closes it. So I'm going to try to say here forest equals polygon this time, and we have to give it different properties. For instance, the map, where it is going to go on. This paths, okay. I guess this should work. Let's try and see how it goes. Okay. So quite interesting, there are even some forests inside the forests here. It's actually somehow excluding it. Okay, very interesting. So I would need to be able to handle these clear areas. So these polygons are not that simple. They are if polygon is on top of a polygon, it means that it's okay. I mean, it could be windy. I think these are quite rare occurrences. Maybe no need to worry about them. But I mean, most likely you are safe if you are here. Like, wind is not gonna blow in this location. But we may need to handle this in a separate way. So here, this looks like double forest, if you will. So you have two polygons on top of each other, but what is happening here in the interface, it seems like they are canceling each other out instead. Okay. So this is now how the forest looks like, and you can see that if you go from A to B at this path, this way that the path is showing to us, you don't go much through the forest. But if you're going to have this kind of route instead, then this one goes very much through the forest. So if you would choose this particular route, it has many shielded areas here. So this is the idea now, that we could calculate how much of this trajectory that I am drawing is going to go through the forested areas or not, and assuming that here it's going to be more windy than here, so less wind on this part. Is this somehow clear? Okay. I think we can have a 10-minute break. We have here the forested areas, and I'm gonna color them green just to mark them as forested areas, because I'm also going to show you how to get the buildings, the building regions. So to make the color here, maybe we are gonna set, well, we have to set the fill color to something. Let's just put it green. I think it should recognize this type of text. But I'm also going to put some opacity here so that we can see through the polygons. So I think that is something like that. Okay, so now we can still see through it, these texts or other landscapes. It's not a nice idea to just hide everything. And maybe we don't want a stroke. This is way too much emphasis. So this black line here around the forested areas is too much. Even the opacity is kind of high, so I'm going to put it a bit lower, and I'm going to say stroke opacity 0. Okay, now it gets a little bit confusing with these areas from here, which mean also some green area like this camping place from Google Maps, or the church park, Lutheran church park. Let's make it back a little bit more emphasized. Okay, this is fine. So now about the buildings. Again, I really recommend getting familiar with this. So I go to this wizard here, I say building, okay, build query, and I get the query. I'm going to export. I can run it, of course. It doesn't have many results because they were not in the screen. Let's run it now. And now I'm going to export. Again, our server there is expecting this XML. So I click on this, and I'm going to copy all of it. And on the server, I'm going to prepare a new request type for get buildings. I'm going to call the function get buildings. And this is going to be more or less copy-paste of the get forest function. These parameters are still going to be helpful, but here I paste this new one that is coming from there. So this should work, we can test it. Apart from one issue, as I said before, the server here expects XML format. So if I'm going to specify JSON here, it's going to cause a little bit complications. So I'm going to remove this attribute from there. And that's it, more or less. I'm going to now try here to make a new request with get buildings. And for now I'm going to let the draw forests on because, well, just to debug faster, if it works. I refresh this and, well, I have buildings, but where is my forest? Maybe I don't debug faster. I will create, okay, and these buildings are now not coming from any parameters here. They are hard-coded values on the server. So this is one thing that I need to do here, modify the north, south, east and west values. So to do this, I'm going to find this specific value and I'm going to replace it with, find and replace it with apostrophe dot $s dot apostrophe. So this happens now like that. So the S was already modified. I'm going to do the same to the west. I'm going to do the same to the north. And I'm going to do the same to the east. So now, because here I'm calling the same bounding box for the forest and for the buildings, I expect to get some different result, not this hard-coded one from there. So let's refresh the page. Okay, now for some reason I'm getting both of them, buildings and forests. There could be some kind of overlapping issue there. But you can see now that the bounding box is that still hard-coded bounding box, but coming from JavaScript this time. So these ones from here. We need to update this to be something else. More or less the region where you plan your route to be needs to be considered there. Okay. Instead of calling here draw forests, we need to call something else like draw buildings, maybe, because I want them to look slightly different. I could put here the same function but parameterized, draw polygon. That could be maybe even better. I think I should do that. So the color that is going to do it green, and let's make the buildings be, let's make it blue. I still rename this variable to buildings for it to be readable, better readable. And I don't need two functions anymore, so it's bad to keep two functions if you have, sorry, draw polygons. There are many polygons coming from the server. Okay, it's very bad when you have copied code, so best to reuse and parameterize as much as possible. So the color now comes as a parameter here. I Resave it, refresh the page. Okay, so now I get forests and buildings in this square region that is still hard-coded for, not exactly square region, but yeah. So I would like to get the bounds from A to B. I mean, I would like the forests and buildings in this area on the map that I see now. When I open the map now, it shows me A, it shows me something here. Now the forest doesn't load for some reason. We'll have to figure out what is happening there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There could be some error or synchronization issue. But anyway, I need to do work. I need to zoom out. I need to pan the map. And every time I'm doing this, I lose time. So this is something that the usability can improve upon. But also, if I move now B here, then these buildings and the forests that may or may not load there don't help me anymore. So I need to update my context every time I'm moving these things. So one thing that we are going to do is we are going to calculate the bounds of these created by these markers on the map. How to do that, I don't remember. But bounds, Google Maps. Okay, this one goes directly to the reference. Not very useful. I would have to spend quite much time to read it. Okay, this is something useful. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to make a function here called setBounds. SetBounds okay, get bounds from markers. Okay, so I want to know what is the bounds that would show the map with all the markers in it. This is what I want to calculate. And I copied some code from somewhere that seems to help me a little bit. First, there is this object, Google Maps LAT-LNG bounds. So I could have found this through the reference here and figure out how to call it like that, but it's tedious to read all the documentation. So either you find samples somewhere or external reference somewhere. Yeah, this isn't really even the same thing. But going back to the code. So what this bounds has, this object, has a method called extend. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through all the markers and I'm going to extend these bounds with every new location coming from the markers. And at the end, I'm going to have some bounds that contain all the markers on the map. Here there is some map fit bounds, but I don't want to do that. This function is just to retrieve the bounds. So I'm going to say return bounds. Before I do that, maybe I copied this code and I prepare another function, maybe it's useful. Set bounds bounds. So there is a function called fitBounds, a method in the map object in Google Maps. And now we can actually call these initially when we create these two markers, center and noliakka. And the map should actually show both of them automatically when we load the page the first time, hopefully. No, there are errors. Bounds is not a function. I am putting here parentheses for some reason, I don't know why. Yeah, so I returned the bounds object that I extended to contain all the markers. Refresh the page, and now it shows both of them, A and B. And if I'm going to move, for example, somewhere else, and then I'm going to call this, I have the option to always call something like this, set bounds, the bounds from all the markers, and the map just goes back to there. So this could be in handy if I ever get lost. So you can get lost by just accidentally pressing the phone screen. You can get lost by having a wet phone screen. Then the map can start to move like crazy. User interface and usability is you need to handle all of these situations. So I'm going to at some point create a button somewhere here that just resets you to where the content is. Okay, so this is one thing, but now I'm gonna investigate the bounds object that comes from the marker. So what is this bounds really? Well, I would need to look at the reference now because I don't remember, and this is encoded in some bad format. So let's do that. I open this, I take this code, I paste it somewhere here. So it's an instance of this LAT-LNG bounds class. We already used that extend method, so this is something we used before. We can get the center of the bounds, but more importantly, I think we can get northeast and southwest coordinates of the bounds. So these are what I'm going to give to the functions that retrieve buildings and retrieve the forested areas in the region. So let's see how these look like. Okay, update. I'm gonna make a function update context from bounds. I could give the bounds as a parameter, but since this is, yeah, let's give it as a parameter. So I can get the northeast, and it's going to be a LAT-LNG object, so we are already familiar with that. And southwest, another LAT-LNG object. So if I want to print now, to get now the values, n is equal to ne dot lat. Okay, so northeast will contain the northmost point, and its latitude is going to contain it. Same goes for east, but the longitude is going to contain it. And then south and west, same things, but from the southwest corner of the bounds. So with these values, I now can remove this code from here and paste it here, but instead of the hard-coded properties, now it's a little bit confusing because the variable names here have the same name as the expected JSON parameter, but it should work. Let's replace this with capitals to be a little bit clearer, even though I don't recommend doing this because this is against the naming conventions of JavaScript, more or less. So variables start with a small letter, not a capital letter. So this get forest is there and get buildings is here. And now we can call update context from bounds and since it is getting the bounds as an argument, you can escape, you can get away with calling it just update context, the function, because when you see bounds here, you know that it's going to update it in the region defined by some bounds. Shortens the function name a little bit, still understandable, so from code writing point of view, it should be okay. So, refresh the page. So now you can see that the buildings are actually being requested from center all the way to Noliak. I don't have yet any kind of updating support for this, so I don't update the context every time I am moving these paths, but I should. This is something that is going to be the next step. Another thing that it can be important to do here, okay, I really have to figure out why there is some bug happening with this. I will check it later.
And sometimes the buildings were green.
I know. Could be some strange indexing issue. It thinks it's a forest, but so there are two requests happening at the same time, but they should be isolated from each other. I don't really understand why they are interfering. It's probably again one of those strange bugs that can take a while to figure out. Anyway, it may even be on the server somewhere. Have to think some synchronization issue. If the server is not able to process more than one query at the same time, it could be complicated to debug. Anyway, what I wanted to mention is here you have the path going from A to B. It could be a situation where your path has to go out of these bounds. For instance, now, so the bounds here from A to B have, okay, I move it a bit up. So the bounds here from A to B don't contain most of this path in this case. So to do a very good job of that, of course, okay, to do not so good job, you can say, let's add an extra region here, maybe like 10% or something to the right. But that's not as a good job as looking at all the points in the path, or paths if we have many of them, and making the bounds not with respect to the markers, but with respect to all the points in the geometries of the polylines. That would be definitely solving the issue here. I'm not gonna do that. It's easy to do, but it takes time. So I just choose not to do that now, but I will write the code that updates this context every time I'm dragging these around. So first thing that needs to be done is remove remove these buildings. So I have the function to redraw new ones, but if I'm gonna do that, I'm just gonna draw on top of each other again and again and again. So these forests and buildings values here, they need to be, again, global variables. I'm going to define them on the top. And instead of locally defining here, I remove the var, so now I'm accessing the global variables instead. But the thing is, I would like to remove them before reinitializing them here. So before I even make the requests, I can say that, and probably that. Even though this is not necessarily needed because it's going to be overwritten soon, but it's safer this way. So the reason why this is safer is because if I don't do that, and then between the time when I'm going to drag the marker and get the if I'm going to drag the marker twice before I get the response, so drag the marker, wait for response, then drag before I get it, then the previous forests will appear on the map again because I did this thing. It's more or less a source for bugs. It could generate some unwanted behavior. So I do empty this array even though I'm expecting it to be regenerated very soon. Buildings. Now the code here doesn't look that great. It's doing many different things. We could separate it even more, and I probably will, but let's see if this works now. Well, it maybe works, but I'm not calling this update context anywhere else than in the main function. So in the main function here, I have this, but every time I want to, for example, drag or add a new marker, get new directions, update labels, I also want to update the context every time this is happening. I don't necessarily want to set the bounds. I will explain why, but first, trust me on this. So I want to update the context also when dragging the marker, and also when clicking the marker, because maybe one of them disappears and then the path changes and somehow the context is different. So I save now this file, refresh the page, and if I drag this here, I get errors. Buildings of I set map is not a function. Okay. Oh, yeah, this is problematic. So these forests and buildings, they are not polygon objects that I can put on the map or remove from the map. They are just arrays of latitude and longitude points coming from the server here. The polygons are generated inside this draw polygons function. Like this one, but I'm losing all the references from there. So okay, polygon objects, and this is a polygon object coming from Google Maps. It's not a good naming system. I have here polygons as well. This should be polygon points. So these are the points, LAT, LNG values that are becoming here part of the paths. And this polygon object doesn't need the object anymore. Sorry for being confusing, but yeah, so this is the thing that I'm going to put on the map, remove from the map. And in this array I'm going to have more of them, and I'm also going to return it so that I can access it later. Or so that I can access it later. And here, when I'm creating a new polygon, I'm going to add it. So like that. And here this should be enough, because JavaScript is very permissive. It doesn't care if this was an array of points and now it became a Google Maps polygon object. It will overwrite it successfully, even though at this stage and here it's still a array of points, which is really hard to read. I would just say something like that. So rename it to be a little bit clearer what is happening here. So here the buildings becomes that, and the color has to be blue, and that's it. Hopefully now it works. Okay. Something works, even though I'm getting these bugs all the time. So these bugs, I really think they are related to the server. Did you notice that something happened there? I dragged very quickly. If you drag really quickly the markers, some strange behavior is going to happen. If you drag before the previous request comes. So this is a synchronization problem. What we have is now it's loading some data. Okay, when I refresh the page, it's now loading some data. It's doing something on the server. Now it takes especially long for some reason. Anyway, if I drag the marker before that happens, 4 requests will actually happen at the same time. The 2 that originally started are still ongoing, and even though I'm going to remove buildings and forests, they are not there yet. So the first requests are not completed. So even though my code is removing things from the map, it has nothing to remove. And then at some point, all requests will finish, and I'm going to have 2 sets of buildings and 2 sets of forests drawn at the same time. And the first one, I don't even have reference to it anymore, because it got overwritten by the second set of requests. So you see how difficult it is to get this kind of interface properly working. Many of these kind of bugs can appear all the time. Of course, if your user is really patient, it waits for everything to load, and now moves this here, those things disappear very, very nicely. Application seems to be working as intended. But if I'm going to do something more crazy, I'm too slow. Okay, now. So when I'm gonna do something more crazy like that, if I'm just too demanding on the interface, it will crash. And I mean, it doesn't crash; it works. But from interface point of view, it becomes really, really confusing here. Why is this darker than that, and so on. Okay, but I think that we will stop here, and what I will do for next time, I will try to see what is happening on the server that is causing this problem of sometimes buildings getting colored in green and sometimes forests not appearing. But more or less, I think this is some silly implementation bug in our overpass, in the communication to this overpass. So, not to worry by the front-end developer in this case. So, it's issue with the API itself, and that one needs to be investigated. I never tried calling it so rapidly. So now more or less 2 different requests happening at the same time. It could become problematic. Any questions about today, or does everybody see where this app is heading towards? Okay, so buildings we need, because if you go through some building, which can be the case sometimes, there are, at least in Joensuu center, there is some place, the mall in city center, I think it can allow you to go through it, this ISOMY. Okay, but maybe OSRM doesn't know about it. Maybe not very useful after all. But not only, really bad, horrible interface. I need to fix this also for next time. So also this synchronization problem and the server-side problem, I will probably fix off-screen, and then I just explain what the issues were, because it takes too much time, so then we move to other stuff. Okay, sorry. So last thing, even if it doesn't allow me to route through the buildings still provide shelter. So if you have, for example, wind that blows in this direction, you are most likely safe on this particular road here. So next lesson, I want to focus more on this thing. can we detect if, for example, the trajectory passes through forested areas or through buildings? And we will do that by figuring out when the trajectory is inside the polygon and when it is not. So we will do a check for is inside or is not inside. And for the wind regions that are blocked by the buildings, I don't know yet, but we will figure out some kind of solution. So hopefully next time we finish, but if not, then next week we finish this application.